Have you ever wondered what really happens when you stop talking, when you pull back, when you finally go silent? Not out of anger, not for attention, but from clarity? Most people think silence means giving up. They'll tell you it's weakness, that if you were stronger, you'd speak up, fight harder, keep trying. But what if that belief is the exact lie that keeps us trapped in cycles we're meant to outgrow? What if silence, calm, intentional silence, isn't weakness but evolution? Let's flip the script. Because this isn't about ghosting someone or playing mind games. This is about reclaiming the energy you once handed away too easily. This is about understanding what really happens when you stop chasing closure, stop explaining your worth, and choose peace over performance. Let me ask you this: have you ever been the one who always reached out first? Always the one fixing things, overthinking texts, rereading messages, trying to figure out what went wrong? And then one day, something shifts. You stop. No dramatic exit, no parting words. Just a deep breath and silence. What if I told you that in that silence, something far louder begins to speak? Something they didn't expect, something that shakes them to their core? You see, silence doesn't disappear. It lingers. It haunts. It becomes the mirror they never wanted to face. And when your voice is no longer part of their world, it's not peace they feel, it's panic. Here's what we're diving into today: the raw, unfiltered truth about what they secretly feel when your silence finally says everything. And we're not talking surface emotions. We're talking about the deep ego discomfort. The spirals at 2 a.m. The questions they never thought they'd be asking. This isn't theory. This is what happens when you walk away, not to punish them, but to finally protect you. And make no mistake, this video isn't just about emotional closure. It's about power, self-respect, growth. Stoic relationships don't beg for validation. They hold the line in silence, and in doing so, they shake the very foundation of what others thought they controlled. This journey will challenge what you've been taught about communication, emotional expression, and who holds the power when the talking stops. And if you stick with me through this, you're going to uncover something revolutionary, something that could change the way you move forever. So lean in, because what comes next? It's not just about them. It's about you. Your evolution. Your rise. And it all begins with the one thing they never saw coming: your silence. 1. The ego starts to crack. At first, they act like nothing changed. They post louder, laugh harder, stretch their confidence across every social platform as if trying to convince not just the world, but themselves, that your silence didn't matter. But deep down, behind every curated smile and forced caption, a question begins to surface. Quiet at first, then louder, then constant. Why aren't you saying anything? The ego hates silence. It thrives on attention, needs validation to breathe. It expects your voice to appear like clockwork. A message. A reaction. A sigh. A spark of anger maybe. Something. Anything. But this time, it gets nothing. No warning. No closure. No dramatic goodbye. Just stillness. And in that stillness, something begins to break. See, the ego prepares for a fight. It prepares for arguments, for emotional explosions, for your disappointment to show up wearing desperation. But your calm confuses it. Your restraint, your distance, your lack of response, it's unnatural to them. Not because you've disappeared from their screen, but because you've disappeared from their script. They knew how to handle the old you. The you who explained. The you who forgave. The you who sent long messages at midnight trying to fix something that was never balanced in the first place. But now, that version is gone. Replaced by someone who's silent. Someone who doesn't need to prove they're hurt. Someone who's stopped offering their energy to people who treated it like background noise. And that, more than anything, is what starts to dismantle their confidence. They thought they had time. Thought they could act cold for a while, disappear for a day or two, breadcrumb their way back into your world when it suited them. But your silence broke that illusion. It told them that time isn't always theirs. That people don't wait forever. that some people grow tired of explaining their worth. So now they find themselves scrolling, checking if you've watched their story, if you've liked anything, if you've left any trace. They won't admit it, but they notice your absence more than they ever notice your effort. And that's where the unraveling begins. Because silence doesn't give them the feedback loop they're used to. They can't predict your next move. They can't measure your mood through words. They can't rely on emotional outbursts to feel important. Instead, they're stuck in their own thoughts, haunted by a lack of information they used to take for granted. And let me be clear, this isn't about revenge. This isn't about playing games. This is about reality. The reality that when you remove yourself from someone's life, especially when your presence was once consistent, they feel it like a withdrawal. Like a system that's been unplugged. Suddenly, the ego that seems so unshakable starts to slip. It tries to rebuild the narrative. They're probably just busy. They'll reach out eventually. They always do. But day after day, that story starts to crack. Because nothing comes. No explanation. No chase. Just silence. Stoicism teaches us that control begins within, that peace is found not in how others react to us, but in how we discipline our responses. And right now, that's exactly what your silence reflects, not apathy, but self-command. Not detachment from feeling, but freedom from being manipulated by feeling. Your silence is a boundary without a label. A line that doesn't need to be announced to be respected. And as the days pass, the ego, so used to being fed, so used to being entertained, starts to starve. It scans the digital horizon, looking for signs that it still matters to you. Of you. A like. A quote that might be about them. But none of it comes. Because you're not playing. You're healing. You're redirecting. You're building a stillness they can't participate in, because the entry fee was respect, and they paid in inconsistency. So what happens next? The ego gets desperate. It tests. A meme posted late at night. A song that holds too much meaning. An old photo resurrected from the archives. And still, silence. Nothing. Your non-response becomes the loudest sound in their world. It echoes across their confidence, shakes the pedestal they thought they stood on, and whispers something they never expected to hear. You're not in control anymore. And that's the deepest fear of all, for people who depend on your reaction to feel powerful. Because silence doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It doesn't beg. It simply exists. Strong. Stoic. Solid. And that's terrifying for someone who once lived off your emotional attention. They expected sadness. Got stillness. Expected drama. Got discipline. Expected a monologue. Got a mirror. And in that mirror, they start to see what was really happening all along. That it wasn't your emotions that made you weak, it was your tolerance. That your silence isn't an escape, it's an answer. That stoic relationships don't end in explosions. They end in elevation. Quiet, graceful, irreversible elevation. And now they sit in that silence, unsure of what comes next, because they've lost access to the version of you they could predict. You're no longer predictable. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer waiting. And that loss of emotional access? That's what breaks the ego, not the absence of love, but the absence of control. Because now they realize the truth, that maybe you were never chasing them to begin with. Maybe you were giving them a chance to show up. And now, that chance is gone. That's what the ego secretly feels when your silence says everything. Not just confusion, not just regret, but the growing, gnawing fear that they were never as essential to you as they believed. And that fear? That's what makes the cracks permanent. That's what turns performance into panic. That's what leaves them spiraling while you remain grounded, not cold, not bitter, just done. That's what stoicism looks like in real life. Not in words, but in energy. Not in speeches, but in absence. And that presence of silence, that unshakable inner clarity, that's the signal that you've stopped explaining your worth to those who never listened. They may not say it. They may never admit it. But trust me, when the ego starts to crack, silence is the hammer that shatters the illusion. And you, in your stillness, become the answer they'll spend months trying to understand. 2. The mind fills in the blanks. The thing about silence is that it doesn't stay still. It moves, not in sound, but in thought. When you go silent, truly silent, their mind becomes the loudest room they live in. And here's what most people don't realize. Silence doesn't leave a blank page, it creates a canvas, one their mind can't stop painting on. At first, it's curiosity. Why haven't you texted? Are you okay? Then it becomes confusion. Did something happen? Are you mad? But eventually it spirals into obsession. Did I do something wrong? Did they meet someone else? Did I lose them for good? That's how powerful your silence is. It doesn't just end a conversation, it starts a storm inside them. Because when you remove your words, they're left with theirs, and that's when the narrative unravels. They replay every message, every silence, every delayed reply. They analyze the last time you smiled, the last moment you were fully present. And here's what drives them mad: they don't know when it happened. They can't pinpoint the exact moment you shifted from open to opaque, from available to unreadable. And that ambiguity? That's the birthplace of their panic. Because the mind hates uncertainty. It fills every silence with storylines, most of them painful, all of them exhausting. And the longer your silence stretches, the more they start believing the stories they create. That you've moved on. That you never cared. That someone else now holds your attention. And maybe none of that is true. But that doesn't matter. Because silence doesn't explain. It reflects. It hands people the pen and forces them to write their own endings. And endings written in fear rarely bring peace. This is where your stillness becomes their torment. Because before they had control. They knew how to trigger a reaction. How to get a response. They knew the rhythm of your attention. But now, there is no rhythm. No cue. No certainty. Just a void. And it's in that void that the mind becomes a maze. They try to retrace every step, hoping to find the version of you who still cared. But that version isn't gone out of bitterness. That version evolved. See, Stoic relationships don't end with explosions. They dissolve in clarity. In the calm realization that not everyone deserves your explanation, that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. And so you go quiet. Not to punish, but to preserve. And while you find calm in your silence, they find chaos in theirs. Their thoughts get louder. Their memories get sharper. Suddenly, the moments they dismissed become sacred. The nights you stayed up. The mornings you showed up. The messages you sent when they were cold and distant. And now that warmth is gone, and they feel the chill. Because nothing is colder than a silence that used to be love. And the mind doesn't just let that go. It circles back. Again and again. Because silence doesn't fade. It lingers. And in the absence of your voice, their inner voice becomes relentless. It says, "Why did I push them away? Why didn't I appreciate them? Did they ever really love me? Are they better off without me?" And these questions, they haunt. Not because you're trying to haunt them, but because silence doesn't soothe egos. It strips them. Stoicism isn't about pretending not to care, it's about refusing to hand your soul to those who mistreated it. And in your refusal to engage, to explain, to re-enter a conversation you already outgrew, you show them what they truly meant. Not through anger. Not through revenge. But through distance. And that distance? It echoes louder than any scream. It makes them question what they never had to think about when you were always there. Because when you were present, they didn't need to think. They had access. But now, they have questions. And not just questions about you, questions about themselves. Your silence forces reflection. And most people can't handle reflection without a filter. You were their filter. You softened the image. But now, all they see is what they did. What they said. Or what they didn't do when they had the chance. And that mirror, they can't turn it off. Because it's not coming from you. It's coming from them. That's the power of Stoicism. It removes the need for closure. It lets the universe do the talking. And trust me, their mind talks. It doesn't rest. Because you weren't just anyone. You were the one who saw through the performance. You were the one who offered real peace, not just attention. And now, they don't just miss you, they miss who they were when you loved them. Because that version of themselves, the one that felt seen, felt grounded, felt enough, that version only existed with you. And now they have to figure out how to feel whole without the one who used to remind them they were. That's the sting of your silence. It doesn't take anything from them. It just refuses to give. And when the giving stops, the illusions fall apart. So now, they refresh the app. They scroll past the memories. They play strong for the public. But internally, they're spiraling. Not because you hurt them, but because they don't understand how you got so quiet, so calm, so free. And that freedom? That's what scares them. Because silence implies peace. And peace implies detachment. And detachment means they no longer matter in the way they thought they did. And when that realization hits, it doesn't just break their heart, it shatters their certainty. Because if someone who loved you could walk away without a sound, then maybe they were never as in control as they believed. Maybe they mistook your effort for dependence. Maybe they never really knew you at all. And now they want to. But it's too late. Because silence isn't a phase, it's a boundary. And boundaries don't bend when they're built from wisdom. And here's the hardest part for them. Your silence isn't even about them anymore. It's about you. Your growth. Your clarity. Your peace. And that's why it hurts. Because they can't fix what isn't broken. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just done. And done can't be negotiated. It can't be reasoned with. It just is. And that is what their mind can't accept. Because the mind wants to fix, to control, to explain. But you've taken away its tools. And now, it's just them and the silence. And in that silence, their stories scream. And none of them bring peace. If you're watching this right now and you feel this power, this calm, this clarity, then let me know you're walking this path too. Like and comment, number 1, if this message speaks to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because this journey of stoicism, of reclaiming your worth, your voice, your peace through silence, it's only just beginning. 3. The power dynamic flips. There's a quiet shift that happens when you stop chasing, when you stop responding, when you stop handing out your energy like it's owed to everyone. And that shift? It flips the entire balance of power. Because they were used to a version of you who explained, who clarified, who tried to make things right even when it wasn't your responsibility. That version was predictable. That version was convenient. That version allowed them to operate with the illusion of control. But when you go silent, when your presence fades into the background without drama, without rage, without a performance, you disrupt that illusion in the most stoic way possible. Not through resistance, but through restraint. And suddenly, they're no longer in control of the narrative. They don't know where they stand. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know if you're hurt, healing, or simply no longer interested. That uncertainty becomes unbearable. Because power, real power, doesn't shout. It whispers. And right now, your silence is whispering something they never thought they'd hear. You're no longer relevant in the way you used to be. Think about that. When someone thinks they can always reach you, that they'll always have your attention, they treat your presence like a guarantee. But when you stop engaging, when you stop performing emotional labor for people who offer none in return, you show them that attention was a gift, not a contract. And once that gift is removed, they scramble. At first, they pretend not to notice. They keep up the facade, posting, smiling, joking. But the tone shifts. The confidence thins. Because every day they don't hear from you, every hour you don't check in, every message they expect but never receive, the silence grows louder. Not around them, inside them. And they start to feel it in places they used to feel secure. It hits them while they scroll through photos that no longer include your likes. It strikes in quiet moments when their name doesn't pop up on your feed. And it's not just about missing you, it's about losing access to someone who once made them feel valuable without them having to earn it. That loss stings. Because when the pattern breaks, they don't just lose the routine, they lose the power they thought they had over your emotions. Suddenly, they're the ones feeling uncertain. They're the ones refreshing their screen, hoping you've seen their stories, hoping you've left a digital footprint somewhere. And when they find nothing, that's when the panic sets in. Not because they loved you deeply, some did, some didn't, but because your silence reminds them they're no longer the center of your universe. And for people who fed off your attention to maintain their ego, that realization is devastating. Because when you stop chasing, you force them to face the truth. They were only confident when you were the one pursuing. And now that the pursuit is over, they feel exposed. Stoicism teaches us that true control is not about manipulating outcomes, it's about mastering response. And in refusing to respond, in holding the line with grace, you've revealed something deeper than revenge. You've revealed that you've reclaimed your autonomy. That you've stopped defining your worth based on how they react to you. And that shift terrifies people who were only comfortable with you when you were uncertain of yourself. They don't know how to interact with the version of you that doesn't seek approval. That doesn't explain every boundary. That doesn't collapse into apologies for simply asking to be treated with basic respect. And now you're not bending. You're not running. You're not initiating. You've exited the stage quietly, while they're still performing for an audience that no longer includes you. That dynamic reversal is subtle but seismic. They feel it in how you move, in the absence of your presence, in the calm of your indifference. Because real power doesn't make noise. It creates space. And you've created a space they can't fill with the same tricks, the same games, the same passive-aggressive behaviors they used before. You've changed the rules by walking away from the game. And now they're playing against themselves. Confused. Frustrated. Wondering how you became so unreachable, so centered, so calm. That calm isn't an act. It's the result of outgrowing dysfunction. It's what happens when you realize that arguing, begging, explaining, it never brought peace. It just prolonged your suffering. And when you finally get tired of suffering, you stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix. You stop trying to decode mixed signals. You stop negotiating with emotional immaturity. You stop performing for people who never clapped. And in that stillness, that discipline, that refusal to engage, you rise. They feel that rise even if they don't understand it. Because the version of you that needed them is gone. Replaced by someone they can't manipulate. Someone they can't predict. Someone who no longer bleeds just to prove they care. And so, the power flips. Silently. Consistently. Irrevocably. Now they're the ones in discomfort. They're the ones feeling unseen. They're the ones wondering if they meant anything at all. And you? You're not pretending. You're not acting. You're just no longer available in the way they took for granted. You didn't ask for the upper hand. You simply let go of the rope. And that shift, that elegant stoic withdrawal, dismantled every illusion they held about you. You don't need them to suffer. You don't need them to beg. You don't need closure. Because the power isn't in getting the last word. It's in knowing you don't need one. It's in becoming a mystery they no longer have access to. That's what Stoic relationships are about, not performance, not revenge, not games, but the quiet reclaiming of your energy. The decision to stop explaining your value and start embodying it. And the ones who lose access? They don't just lose you, they lose the power they never earned. That's the flip. That's the shift. That's the silence that changes everything. 4. The ghost of comfort returns. There's something they never admit, even to themselves, how much they depended on you. Not just on your presence, but on the emotional space you created. You were more than a person, you were a place, a feeling, a home they didn't realize they were living in until the lights went out. And now, in the dark, they're reaching for something familiar, but it's gone. You were the one who saw through the walls they built, who stayed when things got ugly, who responded with grace when they gave you confusion. And now that you've withdrawn, not in anger but in clarity, that comfort has vanished. It's not just that you're gone, it's that the version of them that felt safe around you is gone too. That's what they miss, though they rarely know how to name it. It's not your smile. It's not the way you texted goodnight. It's the emotional grounding you gave them without asking for anything in return. You were the one who translated their silence into understanding. You were the one who held their chaos with steady hands. And when you finally stopped, when you stepped back with no dramatic exit, the temperature changed. Everything got colder. Because it wasn't just about access, it was about connection. About the unseen stability you provided in moments they never thanked you for. That's the ghost that comes back to haunt them. The ghost of comfort. It appears in quiet moments, in the silence after a loud day, in the loneliness that hits at 11:47 p.m., when the lights are dim and the distractions run out. That's when they remember you. Not because of nostalgia, but because peace doesn't replicate easily. It can't be replaced with temporary flings, surface-level laughs, or curated captions. Peace is rare. And the peace you brought? It was real. It was felt. It was grounding. But they didn't recognize it when it was there. They mistook your consistency for predictability, your softness for dependence, your love for availability. And now, they confuse your absence with betrayal. But in truth, it's accountability. You stopped showing up for someone who treated your loyalty like background noise. And now, their soul is restless. Because the comfort you offered didn't come with performance. It came with presence. And that presence was healing. That presence was honest. That presence required effort they were never willing to give. So now, they try to mimic it. They look for that same calm in others. They move fast. Swipe endlessly. Fill their time with noise. But noise doesn't heal. It distracts. And eventually it fades. And when it fades, the ghost returns. Because you're not just a person they lost, you're a version of themselves they can't find without you. The version that felt safe. That felt seen. That felt like they didn't have to pretend. That's the tragedy they never post about. That's the loss they never speak out loud. You became the reminder of who they were when they had a space to be real. And now that space is gone. And they drift. Not because they're heartbroken in the romantic sense, but because they've lost access to a sanctuary they never thought would close its doors. And here's what makes it more powerful. You didn't slam the door. You just stopped holding it open. And there's a stoic truth buried in that decision. When you stop overfunctioning, people are forced to confront the weight of their own actions. And that weight? It hits harder than any words ever could. It's not revenge. It's reflection. And reflection is sharp. It slices through ego. It exposes gaps. It whispers truths they buried. Like how they never truly listened. How they never showed up consistently. How they loved the feeling of you without loving the effort it took to keep you. So now they keep moving. But not forward. In circles. Repeating patterns. Looking for the next hit of attention, the next emotional escape, hoping to feel that same safety. But nothing fits. Nothing sticks. Because you weren't a moment. You were meaning. You weren't noise. You were nurture. And what they miss isn't love, it's alignment. It's how everything felt when they were with you. And now it's gone. Not because you disappeared, but because you evolved. And in that evolution, you became unreachable in a way they never imagined. They thought you'd always be there. That they could dip in and out of your life and you'd keep the light on. But Stoic relationships don't work like that. They're not built on availability. They're built on value. And when someone shows you that they don't value your peace, your energy, your effort, the Stoic thing to do is not to explain, but to exit. Quietly. Permanently. And now, every time they remember you, they don't just miss your presence. They feel the void left behind by your absence. A void they can't fill with substitutes. A void they can't talk their way out of. A void that doesn't yell, doesn't accuse, just exists. Solid. unshaken, gone. That's the ghost of comfort. It doesn't haunt you. It haunts them. Because you didn't walk away angry. You walked away whole. And they weren't ready for that version of you. The version that doesn't need to prove anything. That doesn't wait around for half effort. That doesn't negotiate with inconsistency. You became the version of yourself they weren't prepared to meet. And that's what keeps them up at night. Not what you said, but what you didn't. Not what you did, but what you no longer do. That absence, it's deafening. Because silence doesn't fade like noise. It lingers. It marks. It teaches. And the lesson they're learning now? That peace has a price. That comfort, when misused, disappears. That presence, when unappreciated, retreats. And once it's gone, it doesn't beg to return. It watches from a distance. Unapologetic. Unavailable. Unbothered. And if this resonates, if you feel the power of choosing your peace over their comfort, then hit that like button and comment, number 1 below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because the next part of this journey is going to dive even deeper into how Stoicism gives you the freedom they never saw coming. 5. The illusion of control disintegrates. Control is a story people tell themselves when they're afraid of losing what they've come to depend on. It's subtle, disguised as detachment, as confidence, as disinterest. But deep beneath the surface, it's all about certainty. Certainty that you'll stay, that you'll keep reaching out, that you'll keep trying, that no matter how they treat you, your heart will still be available on demand. And for a long time, maybe that story worked. Maybe you did reach out first. Maybe you did explain yourself over and over, hoping they'd finally understand your heart, your loyalty, your intentions. Maybe you taught them that your love came without consequences, that your presence was guaranteed. But control is only effective when the other person agrees to play the role they've been assigned. And the day you chose silence? That was the day the story began to collapse. Because when you go quiet, you remove the script. You no longer play the character they relied on. You stop being predictable. You stop being emotionally accessible. And that's when the illusion of control begins to disintegrate, not in a loud explosion, but in a series of realizations they can't ignore. It starts with confusion. Why haven't they said anything? Are they really done? Then comes irritation. They're just trying to get a reaction. They'll come back. Then, slowly, fear creeps in. What if they've moved on? What if I push them too far? And finally, the truth. The brutal, sobering truth. They're no longer in control. Because control requires access. It requires leverage. And silence removes both. Silence says, you no longer get to shape how I respond. You no longer dictate how I feel. You no longer influence the rhythm of my emotions. That's a terrifying realization for someone who depended on your reactions to feel relevant. Because as long as you were reacting, good or bad, they still mattered. But now, your silence has become a boundary. A line in the sand. A wall they can't climb, can't break, can't bypass. And here's where Stoicism changes the game. You're not silent to manipulate. You're silent because you've chosen clarity over chaos. Peace over proving yourself. Maturity over mayhem. And in that choice, you take back every ounce of power you once gave away. Suddenly, they're the ones overthinking. They're the ones refreshing their feed. They're the ones wondering what you're thinking, where you've gone, how you became so still. Because stillness, real stillness, is confusing to those who rely on chaos to feel secure. They don't understand how you can be so composed, so unreachable, so unaffected. But you're not unaffected. You're just unmoved by the things that once held you hostage. You've detached not from love, but from illusion. And that detachment is your liberation. It means they can no longer use silence as a weapon, because you've made silence your sanctuary. They can't bait you into conflict, because you've stopped playing the game. They can't guilt you into conversation, because you've outgrown the need for closure. And so the illusion they held, this belief that they could always pull you back in with the right mix of breadcrumbs and guilt, that illusion crumbles. They thought they had you figured out. Thought you were the emotional one. The forgiving one. The one who always came back. But now you're the one who walked away, not with fire, not with rage, but with grace. And that exit? It didn't slam the door. It just left it open, without a return date. And they know, deep down, they know the moment they try to walk through it, you won't be there anymore. That's what breaks their confidence. Not your anger, but your indifference. Not your revenge, but your release. Because letting go without bitterness, that's a level of strength they never expected from you. And now they're sitting with questions they never thought they'd ask. Not about what you did wrong, but about what they lost. About how they failed to see your value when it was in front of them. And about why your absence feels heavier than your presence ever did. That's when they realize the truth. Control was always an illusion. A fantasy built on your willingness to stay small. To doubt yourself. To question your worth every time they pulled away. But now you've stopped shrinking to fit their narrative. And that silence? That's you reclaiming your space. Your peace. Your self-respect. Because the moment you stopped responding was the moment you said, without words, I no longer need to be chosen by someone who doesn't know how to value what I bring. And that message? That unspoken, unshakable truth, it echoes in every moment they try to act unbothered. It speaks louder than their curated stories, their fake indifference, their surface-level smiles. Because underneath it all, the disintegration is happening. Quietly. Relentlessly. They're losing their grip on the one thing they thought they'd always have, your emotional availability. And that loss is permanent. Because even if they come back, even if they say the right things, even if they try to rewrite the ending, the energy has changed. You're not there anymore. Not fully. Not blindly. Not eagerly. You've evolved. And Stoic relationships evolve with you. They're no longer based on cycles. They're based on standards. Boundaries. Inner alignment. And if someone can't meet you there, you let them go, not to hurt them, but to heal yourself. And in doing so, you expose the deepest truth, that the illusion of control was never about you. It was about their fear. Fear of losing access to someone who made them feel more secure than they ever admitted. And now that access is gone. Not because you disappeared, but because you grew. Because you realized that love isn't sacrifice without reciprocation. It's not staying in rooms where your soul is starving. It's not explaining yourself to people who listen only to reply, never to understand. So you walked out quietly. And in doing so, you broke the cycle. You dismantled the illusion. You became someone they can no longer figure out, no longer predict, no longer manipulate. And that, more than any speech, more than any confrontation, is what undoes them. The silence you gave them? It became the teacher they never asked for. And the lesson? That control, when built on ego, always collapses under the weight of self-respect. You didn't win the argument. You didn't need to. You ended the performance. And now, they're left with the silence. And in that silence, the illusion fades. 6. The guilt finds its voice. Guilt is a strange companion. It doesn't knock loudly at first. It whispers, waits, lingers quietly behind distractions, performances, and self-justifying thoughts. But over time, especially in the presence of your silence, guilt begins to grow teeth. And when someone who once took you for granted is no longer receiving your words, your attention, your emotional investment, when there's no more explanation for your distance, no more late-night confessions or emotional paragraphs for them to interpret, they're left alone with something far more difficult than your presence, themselves. And in that quiet, their own voice begins to echo back at them, not the voice they share with others, not the one they perform with, but the one that knows the truth. The truth they buried. The truth they denied. The truth they dressed up as indifference, but that now shows up every time they see your name, and can no longer reach out without wondering if you'll answer. And that voice? It speaks in questions. Why did I treat them like that? Why didn't I appreciate them when they were right there? Why did I think they would always stay? These aren't dramatic questions, they're sobering ones. The kind of questions that come not from heartbreak but from recognition. Recognition that they lost someone who didn't leave out of pettiness, but out of peace. You didn't rage. You didn't blame. You didn't even ask for anything in return. You just stopped. Stopped responding. Stopped trying. Stopped investing in what clearly wasn't feeding you back. And that calm, measured exit? It cuts deeper than any storm ever could. Because it forces them to feel without a fight. There's no defense against silence. No argument to win. No counterpoint to make. Just space. And in that space, guilt begins to fill the void. At first, they try to fight it. They tell themselves stories. You were too emotional, too intense, too much. But those stories don't hold up under silence. Because silence doesn't offer rebuttals, it offers reflection. And over time, the cracks form. They remember the look in your eyes when you were still trying. They remember the messages you sent that they ignored. The comfort you gave without being asked. The way you forgave before being apologized to. The way you showed up when no one else did. And now that you don't, they feel that shift like a cold wind in a once warm room. They feel your absence not as punishment, but as consequence. The result of their own choices. That's what Stoicism reveals. It doesn't chase justice through drama, it lets nature balance the scales. And nature is doing just that. See, when someone is used to being forgiven, they stop fearing consequence. But when the forgiveness ends, not with a scream, but with silence, they're left alone to review the evidence. And the case they build against you starts falling apart. Because you were never the villain. You were the one holding the relationship together while they took it for granted. And now that guilt speaks louder than ever. It shows up when their new conversations feel shallow. When no one texts back like you did. When the validation they seek doesn't hit the same. Because what they're really missing isn't attention, it's intention. Your intention. Your presence. Your depth. Your care. The kind of care that doesn't come often. And once it's gone, it leaves a silence that turns into a mirror. And in that mirror, they see everything they couldn't face while you were still around. How selfish they were, how distant, how careless. How they mistook patience for passivity. And now the guilt finds its voice. Not because you said something, but because you stopped. Because silence has a way of amplifying what words never could. It echoes in their mind when they're alone. It shows up in memories they can't shake. And the worst part? They know they can't reverse it. They know even if they reach out, even if they try, the dynamic has shifted. The version of you that would have accepted their half-effort is gone. Replaced by someone who knows their value. Someone who doesn't respond to breadcrumbs. Someone who doesn't chase people who walk away so easily. And that knowledge, that awareness that they're no longer part of your emotional universe, that's what the guilt feeds on. Because guilt isn't just about what they did to you. It's about what they lost in themselves when they lost you. They lost the version of them that could feel safe around you. That could be vulnerable. That didn't have to wear a mask. And now, they're performing again, but the stage is empty. You're not clapping. You're not watching. You've left the theater. Not with rage. Not with bitterness. But with resolve. And that kind of exit? It doesn't offer closure. It doesn't offer relief. It just leaves them holding the silence, replaying every moment, wishing they'd handled it differently. That's how guilt sounds. Like the echo of a door that never slammed, but still closed. Like the weight of a goodbye that was never spoken, yet felt in every moment afterward. And now they sit in it. They sit in the aftermath of your peace. And that peace? It doesn't comfort them. It challenges them. Because you didn't disappear to make a point. You disappeared to make a decision. And decisions like that? They leave marks. Not on your heart, but on theirs. Because the guilt they feel now is the cost of realizing too late that they were never entitled to your energy, your forgiveness, your constant emotional labor. And now that you've reclaimed all of that, they're left with themselves. With their choices. With their own silence. And that's when guilt finds its voice. Loud, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. It doesn't beg for forgiveness. It doesn't ask for redemption. It just sits there. A reminder. A weight. A truth they now have to carry. And if you know what it feels like to walk away with your dignity intact, to choose your growth over their guilt trip, then you already understand this chapter. This is Stoicism in action, not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. The willingness to let someone go not because you don't care, but because you care too much to stay where you're not seen. And if you've felt that shift, if you've lived that silence, if you've watched someone crumble under the weight of their own actions while you moved on in peace, then like this video and comment, number 1, below. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what comes next will show you exactly how your stillness becomes their chaos, and how Stoic relationships never end in fire, they end in freedom. The journey doesn't end when you go silent, it begins. Because silence, real silence, isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of understanding. It's not cold, and it's not cruel. It's calm. It's clarity. It's choosing your inner peace over external performance. When you've been the one who gave, who tried, who opened your soul to someone incapable of truly receiving it, and then you choose to stop, not because you ran out of love, but because you ran out of yourself to give away, that's when you become unshakable. That's when you start to live from a different place, not reactive, not emotional, not desperate, but deliberate. That's where Stoicism becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes your way of moving, of breathing, of knowing who you are without needing it validated by someone who once couldn't even look you in the eye when they were wrong. What they secretly feel when your silence says everything is far more powerful than any words you could have thrown at them. Because silence is not passive, it's the ultimate filter. It removes the noise, the drama, the chaos, the explanations that never changed anything. It strips the interaction down to its bones and forces everyone to confront the raw truth, what was said, what was done, and more importantly, what wasn't. And they feel that. They feel every inch of what they lost, not just in you, but in the version of themselves that was safe in your light. They feel your absence in their routines, in their sleep, in their scrolls. They feel it in their nervous smiles and forced conversations. They try to act okay, maybe even believe it for a moment, but the mind has a way of catching up when the world slows down. And when it does, the questions start circling again. Not just, did I lose them? But, why did I think I could treat them that way? What was I trying to prove? Why did I waste so many chances? These aren't questions they'll ask out loud. They don't want the world to know they're feeling the burn. But they are. Because the silence you left behind isn't just absence, it's reflection. It's accountability. It's consequence. It's everything they didn't expect to feel when they assumed they could pull back and find you still waiting. But Stoic relationships don't reward inconsistency. They don't chase after indecision. They walk. And when they walk, they don't look back, not with resentment, not with regret, but with resolve. That's the moment the roles reverse. You're not the one pacing. They are. You're not the one checking. They are. You're not the one wondering if you'll be enough next time. Because you've realized there doesn't need to be a next time when someone has shown you that your effort was only meaningful when it was convenient for them. That's the brutal wisdom of silence. It teaches lessons people were never willing to learn when you were speaking them out loud. And maybe they'll move on. Maybe they'll find someone else. But even if they do, the part of them that only you could reach, that part doesn't forget. It doesn't forget your patience. It doesn't forget the way you listened when they couldn't even articulate their pain. It doesn't forget the way you stayed when they were hard to love. And when someone new doesn't understand them like you did, when that person doesn't decode their moods, doesn't forgive their distance, doesn't see through their masks, they'll remember you. And that memory won't be wrapped in anger, it'll be wrapped in quiet awe. Because you were rare. You were deep. You were home. And now that home is locked. Not because you slammed it shut, but because they lost the key. And here's the part they never saw coming. You didn't just grow without them, you grew because of them. Because their neglect, their silence, their arrogance, It all pushed you into a new version of yourself. The version that doesn't beg to be seen. The version that doesn't need a reply to feel worthy. The version that doesn't need to explain why they finally chose peace. And in choosing that peace, you discovered something sacred. Your value was never tied to their recognition of it. It was always yours. It was just buried under all the performing you were doing to be enough for someone who couldn't even meet you halfway. But now you see clearly. Now you know that being silent doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. It means you know when the conversation no longer deserves your voice. It means you've accepted that not all closure comes in the form of words. Sometimes closure is waking up and no longer wondering if they'll ever get it. Sometimes closure is the way your body relaxes when you no longer anticipate disappointment. Sometimes closure is silence. And the silence you gave them? It's not just a personal decision, it's a spiritual boundary. A line that says, "I'm done leaking energy into people who use my heart as a mirror and never offer one back." And if they're honest, brutally honest, they'll admit they feel that shift. Not because you rubbed it in their face. Not because you tried to get revenge. But because you moved in a way they didn't think you were capable of. And that strength? That's what stays with them. That's what becomes the ghost in every moment they feel alone. You didn't just walk away. You transformed. And that transformation isn't loud. It's not flashy. It's subtle. Elegant. Deep. Like the slow rise of dawn after a long night. And while they're still trying to make sense of your silence, you've already found your rhythm. You're building, healing, expanding into spaces they can't follow because they didn't respect the version of you that gave them a map. And maybe someday, they'll wish they'd been different. Maybe someday, they'll send a message you never receive. Maybe they'll ask themselves, "What if I had tried harder? What if I had listened?" But by then, it won't matter. Because you're not waiting for those questions. You've already answered your own. You've already healed the part of you that thought love had to be earned by sacrifice. You've already forgiven yourself for all the times you overextended. And that forgiveness? That's the real silence. The silence within. The silence that says, "I don't need anything from them to feel whole." That's what Stoicism teaches us. To find stillness not in the absence of conflict, but in the presence of truth. To walk away not to punish, but to protect. To go silent not out of fear, but out of strength. And that strength? It becomes a new language. A language only those who've done the work can speak. And that's why they can't understand you now. You've elevated. And they've been left behind, not because you pushed them, but because they stopped growing. And the silence you gave them? It became the bridge between who you were and who you've become. So if they're still wondering what you're thinking, if they're still stuck in the loop of what if they're still feeling the weight of a goodbye that was never said, it's because your silence still speaks. Louder than anything you could have written. More clearly than any apology. More powerfully than any message ever could. It says, "I loved. I gave. I stayed. Until staying meant losing myself. And now I choose me." That's the message. That's the echo. That's the truth that lingers when silence says everything.